Can y'all see my face? And you can hear my voice? And I am really happy to be here with you. This is a very special place. I've gotten to meet with students. I was just interviewed by Uncolonizing Radio. Where are they? Where's Tash? Anyway, we had a fantastic conversation about prisons and about schools, and I love everybody I met, including you. And so I want to utilize every minute I have here to just share with you some things that have happened to me. And isn't that, it's always when I get the most interested when somebody says, I'm not going to state for y'all my doctrinal beliefs so much, but let me just tell you what happened to me and what I learned and how I changed. So I want to kind of divide the talk into two parts because I want to talk about the experience that led to Dead Man Walking and the writing of the book and how I had really good editors at Random House who helped me shape that story. And then tell you the story a little bit about how the movie happened and the opera too. Because the arts, we have three ways, I think. There's probably more, but anyway, I'm just going to name three, where we help people to reflect deeply in our culture. One, of course, is education, which you're getting here by being here. Another is spirituality. The other is the arts. And we don't live in a society, in a culture that prizes the arts. We think arts are fluff, or arts are escape. But the arts, like the play of Dead Man Walking that Tim Robbins wrote, he didn't do it for Broadway. He wrote it for young people across this country to do. It's called the Dead Man Walking School Theater Project. And when a school, high schools or colleges do it, two other departments have to pick up the issue of the death penalty. So discourse is going around the school, and theater then becomes the catalyst of it. Because there's nothing like live theater to take you into this experience of a terrible crime, the horror, the outrage we feel when innocent people are killed. Here's the victim's family suffering. And then on the other side, here's the one who did it. And then you begin to find out about his life, and you meet his mother, and you meet his little brothers, and you begin to find out about his life. And then, okay, we're going to have justice done here. He did it. Now he's going to pay the price. And then as we move toward his execution. Well, the book is written that way because that was my experience. And then Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon were the ones who made that film happen. And you got to know, Susan is really the spark that got the film of Dead Man Walking. Because you know what? A book is like a child. You put the book out there, the little book goes wherever the little book wants to go. And it wanted to go into the lap of Susan Sarandon. You can't blame the book for that. And she was filming The Client in Memphis, you know, a Grisham story. And she had to come to New Orleans for a couple of days of filming. But somebody had given her the book of Dead Man Walking. It had just come out in paperback. So, you know, when you're doing a film, you have a lot of trailer time. You have time in your trailer. I mean, the big stars get trailers. The rest don't get trailers. But she had her trailer. And she had the book. And she's reading this book. She called me. I didn't seek her out. I didn't seek to have a film made. In fact, the sisters, when we were talking after the book came out, they said, Helen, don't let Hollywood do your film or anything, because they're going to have you eloping with the death row inmate or something. You know how Hollywood is. So we weren't looking to get a film made, believe me. Because to handle nuns right, they never handle nuns right. You either got the flying nun or you got the nuns, but to get it, they don't get it. So I wasn't seeking out anybody, hey, you want to do a film? But Susan calls me. And I picked up the phone in the kitchen. She says, hi, this is Susan Sarandon. I'm reading your book. And I think we need another kind of film on the death penalty in this country. And I think I know who needs to do it. Can I meet you for supper? Could we meet? I go, yeah, you know. We go to the Bon Ton. It's a real good Cajun restaurant. And, you know, get it, crawfish étouffée. But to get ready, I had heard of Susan, of course. I'd heard her name. through Amnesty International that she was so strong on human rights. But I don't know what the lady looks like. I don't want to be the one sitting in the restaurant. She comes in, I'm the last one to know she's there. So we rent, the group of us, rent Thelma and Louise. And you got to know, all of us got mixed up because I thought Gina Davis, during the whole movie Thelma and Louise, was Susan Sarandon. And she's that ditzy one doing those stupid things with little Brad Pitt, get them in trouble. They end up driving off a blooming cliff with the law behind them. And we're all saying, wow, Helen, do you think she could be you? And I go, wow, I don't know. So anyway, when I'm sitting in the restaurant waiting for Susan and she comes in, I said, thank you, Jesus. She's Louise. I was so relieved. Of course, I told everybody that except Susan, only when I got to know her. And I said, you know, Susan, I got a confession. She stood back like this. She went, Gina Davis, like I knew. And so they did the film. You got to know, this was a film done against all odds. It took her 9 months to get Tim Robbins to read the book. He was doing other projects. So she'd say, did you read the nun's book? No, I did not read the nun's book. Susan, I'm doing this. You got to read the book, Tim. Because she said, when his imagination is seized, those are the things that he works on. So finally, after 9 months, they're walking down the streets of New York one night, and she took him by the arm, and she burst into tears. And she said, Tim, if we're not going to do that in film, we need to turn over the book to somebody who will. So probably for domestic tranquility, he goes, okay, I'll read the nun's book, okay? And then it wasn't a film like any other film. It wasn't a formula film about the death penalty. All the films before then the whole thing was, did they do it or not? They're guilty, they pay the price, you end with the execution. Or you find out they're innocent. But this was going to be the story of somebody guilty, and Tim says, we're going to bring the American people into all the hard questions. Well, what about when somebody is guilty of doing an unspeakably terrible crime? Can't we kill them? And he wrote it up, tried to shop it around. Every Hollywood studio turned down Dead Man Walking. None of them could see it. First of all, they knew it brought people on a deep journey. And they said, the American people don't want to go on a deep journey. They want to have action films. They want to have drama. And so finally, Polygram Film International in London picked it up and said, okay, Tim, go for it. They gave him complete freedom in the writing of the film. And on the night of the Academy Awards, of course, they're very glad that they did the film, because against all odds, when Tim would get to the second highest echelon with the Hollywood studios, they'd say, well, Tim, you know, it's kind of a heavy film, you know, Dead Man Walking. I mean, that doesn't exactly give you a lift. And then they said, and you got no romantic element in it. I mean, you got a nun. Now, if you let us spice it up with the nun and the death row inmate, maybe we gonna have something, yeah? And he'd go, no, it's not about spicing it up with the nun and the death row inmate. This is a story, a journey of redemption for everybody. And then, of course, the film came out. And to me, it was all just amazing. I did my little part, and I tried to do it well. In the writing of the book of Dead Man Walking, I had a wonderful editor at Random House. And he let me write the whole first draft. I'd never written a book before. When I was writing Dead Man Walking, I read about 20 books on how to write. So, you know, you kind of pick up the craft as you go. And I do come from the South, and Southerners are storytellers. So there's a natural storytelling kind of thing. But when Jason Epstein, who was my editor, I've only worked with great Jewish people at Random House, the Catholic nun and the Jewish editors. I mean, it's been great. It's been a wonderful partnership. So Jason looks at that first draft, and he said, you wait far too long in the story before you talk about the crime. people are not going to automatically just want to read this book, because what are you? You're a Catholic nun, you're spiritual advisor to somebody on death row did a terrible murder. And they're going to think she's just going to be so overly sympathetic to the murderer. Well, he's a child of God. We should forgive everybody, and get all these Christian platitudes coming out. And you, in the first 10 pages, have to talk about the crime, and we're going to get into that tonight too, and look at it and be horrified at it, and the reader has to know that you're standing in horror of what has happened too. And the secret of this book, and it'll fail if you collapse the tension on any page, is the horror of what this person on death row did, and you gradually are taking your reader into the horror of what it means for the state of Louisiana to take this man and kill him. And that's the tension that you have to keep in the book. And so I was given really good editors. And you know, William Faulkner, when he got the Nobel Prize for Literature, in his speech, said, you know, the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. And now let me take you into that journey. And it was, first of all, the waking up. For me, it was a spiritual awakening that the gospel of Jesus and what Jesus was about was not just going to the convent, being a holy nun, being able to meditate and get into close union with God, separate from the wicked world, going out to teach the kids, getting back to the convent. When the big change that happened in religious sisters after Vatican II was, for the first time we got back to our founders. We are not monastic communities separated from the world. We are women to get in there with the people. Even our habit that we wore, you know, was black cloths. We had a veil, and we had long black robes and a cord around our waist. And it was to dress like widows in the 17th century in France, because women who went out on the street, if you weren't accompanied by a man, the only way women could freely move about to get with the people was to dress like widows. Stuck for 300 years. We did a lot of sweating in New Orleans dressed like widows of the 17th century, I can tell you that. We had a very funny sister, Sister Gertrude, you know. We had these white things up here, you know, and you always look fresh as a daisy because of the white and all. It's July, getting on a bus. And Gert hears this lady whisper to this other lady, look at those nuns. They always look fresh as daisies, even in July. And Gert turns to the sister with him and said, kid, what's that rolling down my leg? But the idea was to go among the people, to be with the people. Because you see, before then, it was thought that women had to be cloistered to protect them. Women needed to be protected. And of course, as you know, then women got blocked from being able to go to universities, and because they couldn't learn Latin. And so education was cut off from women. And so when our sisters began, guess who needed us? Well, they had starving. They had a thing in France. Everybody, beginning with the babies, was always so hungry. It's called the hunger disease, that people got mentally unbalanced because from the time you were a baby and you got your mother's thin milk because she was undernourished, you were always hungry. So, of course, you had massive hunger. You had orphans. But, of course, it didn't take us long to make our way to the women, to the young girls, and to educate them. Our sisters in Cincinnati had an apartment house for women coming in from the country to come into the city so that they could have a place and where they could be safe and where they could begin to get jobs, you know, before women were really liberated. And it's no secret, you all know, that the UN has put as one of the chief things that if you elevate the women, you elevate the race. Over half of the institutions of higher learning in the United States have been started by nuns. We turned them over, a lot of them, to people, but it was about education and the education of women. And I'm an example of that. I went to St. Joseph Academy, where I learned to use my mind, where I was affirmed, and that's why I joined the sisters. I wanted to be a teacher. And when you're a nun, you're free to do the work that you're called to do, and you have community support under you. And I'm really blessed to belong to this particular community of sisters. I just did a long interview with NPR with Barbara Haggerty, who's interviewing people about the 50th anniversary of Vatican II and how it affected women and how it affected nuns. So it ought to be coming on in the first week of October. So the story, it took me a while to wake up that the gospel was about doing justice, because I came from a family of privilege. My daddy was a successful lawyer. He was the president of the first television station in Baton Rouge. He was a successful businessman. We had bishops coming over to the house for supper. He was connected to judges. And he was a good man. But I grew up during the days of Jim Crow. I never questioned black people had to sit in the back of the bus. I never questioned that black kids couldn't make their first Holy Communion at Sacred Heart Church with us white kids. I never questioned anything, because I was part of a culture, and that's what culture does. It's like osmosis. This is the way we do things. This is the way things are. But what was happening in the community after Vatican II happened was some of our sisters were going down to Latin America. And they're coming back with these stories, and they're raising all of our consciousness. They're troubling us. They're saying, we need to be more involved directly with the justice issues of our age. And I was one of the people, who said, well, look, if the poor have God, they have everything. Our job is to be nuns, not social workers. We can't be working on all this social justice stuff. I was really against it. I was directing people on retreats. I was being contemplative in a humble way. I never levitated or anything, but and I didn't get it. I really didn't get it. It was sincere. Then later, when you look back, when you wake up and you realize it's grace. And so anyway, what happened was, and this is the first part of Dead Man Walking, we had a conference. They shipped us all to Terre Haute on these buses because this nun was going to come talk to us for 3 days. And to my horror, I found out she was one of those social justice nuns, and we were going to have her for 3 days. We were bound to come out brainwashed. We were captive in the dormitories over at Terre Haute, St. Mary of the Woods. And the first day I did come through unscathed. Sister Maria Augusta Neal was her name. She taught at Hampshire College in Boston for 40 years, and she taught the Gospels, the New Testament, and sociology. And the first day she talked about the huge inequities in the world, the rich countries of the world. And I went, I know that. I mean, that's the way the world's always been. You got the rich countries, got the poor countries. That's sad. But I mean, what you can do? I mean, you're one little person in the world. That's the way the world's always been. And she announced the next day she was going to talk about Jesus. So I thought, I'm home free. Because I know about Jesus. I've been meditating on Jesus. I've made the 30-day spiritual exercises of Ignatius and Loyola. Been silent 30 whole days. Probably drove God crazy. But let's talk spiritual here. So, okay, she's going to talk about Jesus. I slept really well that night. I didn't have any trepidation about what might be waiting for me on this road. And I can tell you the line she said, and it changed the spiritual trajectory of my life and brings me before you here today, brought me into my work. And she said, Jesus preached good news to the poor. And I really thought I knew what line was coming next. I was ready for it, about how every hair of your head is numbered, not a sparrow drops to the ground, how beloved we are of God, that God so close we can call God like Daddy or Abba. And she said, integral to the good news Jesus preached to the poor was that they would be poor no longer. Boing, oing, 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 oing. I sat in the chair just like you. My body didn't move. And see, I'd been struggling against this justice stuff. And then I realized, I don't even know any poor people. I don't know. Right straight down from our mother house in New Orleans, where we're out in Lakeview, one block down was one of the 10 major housing projects where African American people were forced to live, living in poverty, struggling against racism, and I'm oblivious to this. And I never had been to one of them. I never felt called to go to any of them. Well, there are some people, if you feel called to go to the poor, you want to go work with the African Americans in the inner city, you go. I didn't see any connection with the gospel of Jesus and being on the side of justice or being in solidarity with people who have no voice or people who are oppressed. I didn't know I was privileged. I didn't know I'd been protected and cushioned. It's not that I was virtuous. It's just that I had had so many protections and cushions. And when she said that about Jesus, then I got it about the Gospels. The reason Jesus got killed was it was the radical new kind of community he formed, where everybody was equal. And I got to tell you, being on this campus, when I go into a bathroom that says self-identified women, I just have to tell you what a beautiful, wonderful thing you got going here, where everybody is respected as who they are. And that was a dimension of the gospel. Because see, when we're separated, we don't get it. We just think people are being poor, like, I mean, this stuff we hear from the Tea Party and this crazy stuff. Well, poor people, they don't have to be poor. Now, my grandfather, he laid cobblestones in Boston. What's it with these people? Why are they poor? And separation and ignorance makes us uncompassionate. We don't have a capacity for it. And the reason I'm so aware of this is I get on planes and go among the American public September to May. And it's not that people want the death penalty and they've thought about it deeply and they've come to a decision of conscience. They never thought about it. They don't think. How can they be exposed to it? Because the way the media sets up the story, it's time for an execution. They pit the two. Here's the victim's family. What would you like to see happen to this person? Are you in favor of the execution? Yes, we are. Our daughter was killed. And then you go and you show the execution. And they had such a formula in Louisiana because we were killing people right and left. The 10 southern states that practice slavery do 80% of all executions in the United States. This thing is threaded through and motivated by race. And the telling point of it is, who'd you kill? Who did you kill? Who's outraged over their death? That they'd seek an ultimate punishment, millions of dollars of expense. A black person? That's not even a blip on the radar screen in the DA's office. New Orleans, we had 6 black kids killed this past weekend. We have a killing field going on in New Orleans. Black on black crime, a white person. And you look, not just Louisiana, not just the deep South states, but all across Illinois, any of the states that have had the death penalty, 8 out of every 10 people put on death row are there because they killed a white person. Now, there's special categories for people of color, like if the person's a policeman or if somebody comes in and kills a whole black family. But one-on-one, if you don't value a life, you're not outraged over a death. And I'm going to learn all this, of course. But one of the greatest gifts of my life was living among African-American people in the St. Thomas housing projects as my neighbors who taught me. And that's when I came to the realization, being in the Adult Learning Center with these kids coming out of the public schools, getting as far as 11th grade and not being able to read a 3rd grade book. And I went to St. Joseph Academy. I went to St. Mary's Dominican. I got an education. I know how to write. I know how to articulate. I know how to be a person of agency to help change come. And people are coming in, and people mumble. I can't even stand up and just say, my name's Kevin. It's just like, what's your name? Wait, what's your name? Tell me your name. What's your name? Just to get people to say their name. and then to begin the long, hard road because they don't have any other foundation. And they think, oh, I made a decision, I'm going to come back to school. And it'll be a couple of months, I'll just be able to get this GED. Then I'm going to go get me a job. And young people are idealistic, and then they slap down and slap down and slap down. One, Carlos who tried to get a job at a drugstore over near St. Charles Street, and when the guy who was looking to hire him saw where he lived in the St. Thomas Housing Project, automatically he didn't hire him. And Carlos said, sisters, would y'all go talk for me? That guy's just looking at my address. He ain't gonna hire me because of where I'm coming from. Not to mention how the banks redline things, and not to give people loans. So at the business level, the education level, and the police level, if I had broken down on a highway in Louisiana, a state trooper pulled up behind me, I wouldn't have been scared. I would go, oh, good, here's help. Young man after young man after young man in the African-American community talked about their experiences with the police. And when I did the research for Dead Man Walking, I found out there were more complaints to the Justice Department for police brutality in New Orleans than any other city. But when you're living out in the suburbs, it could be in India. I didn't know. And then I began to see how it worked. We have had tremendous struggles with the police department in New Orleans and the way they treat young black men. Sister Kathleen and I witnessed it from the porch of Hope House one day. Bobby Leonard had gotten out of prison, and he was coming to the Adult Learning Center to tell the young people, stay in school, and it was encouraging. And he left, and he was putting up a sign to invite people that had people in prison, which is everybody, and the police start harassing him for hanging up a sign on a tree, and they mentioned some kind of, municipal ordinance where you're not supposed to put a sign on a tree. Next thing we know, the policemen are throwing Bobby over against the car, and he turned around like this, and he said to us standing there on the porch, sisters, y'all are my witness. I got no drugs on me. They're going to try to plant drugs on me. I got no drugs on me. And then they took him off in the police car. And so we'd go down to the jail. I mean, white women having to go stand up for black men. Look at it was just so much. And I think it was when I saw the suffering, when I saw the struggle of the mothers. Every time there was a gunshot, mothers were, where's my child, where's my child? Sister Lillian started planting trees for the kids that had been killed by drive-by shootings. I had never been exposed to any of this. And I saw the courage of people. I saw people holding down 2 jobs. I saw the light going out of the young black men's eyes when they failed again in school or dropped out, over 50% dropping out. The public schools were going down the toilet. We had the biggest Catholic private school, system in the United States, in New Orleans. We had so many Catholic schools. So you have a 2-tier system. Where's Jesus? Where are we? And none of it's bad. You can't blame parents who want their kids to go to good schools. But if I had it to do all over again, I'd have been in that public school, because I'd have known to make the choice, to go be in solidarity with. Not like I'm coming in to save everybody. Just when you wake up, you know you got to do something and make a difference and be in solidarity with people. And that's when I began to learn. That's when I also learned to write. Because I'd come back, I'd be out in the suburbs talking to people, and he'd say, why don't those people get jobs? Why don't those people? All the stereotypical stuff. And I thought to myself, I got to find a way to tell a story, to show a face, a human face of what's happening to people in this system. And it's while I was at St. Thomas, working in the Adult Learning Center, trying to help people get jobs. And one day, a friend of mine came out of the Prison Coalition office, and he had a clipboard. Everybody was meeting that day is asking them to be part of this project. He happened to run into me. And he said, hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal, somebody on death row? I said, yeah, sure, I could write some letters. I was an English major. I could write some nice letters, that fellow, whoever that is there. I didn't know much about the death penalty, but I knew if they sitting on death row, they're poor. I mean, the street language was capital punishment means them without the capital get the punishment. Because you're poor, you get a public defender who has 100 cases, overworked, underpaid, and you don't have a chance. The DA would think 20 times before taking on somebody who's going to get a crackerjack attorney to face him in the arraignment, do pretrial motions, fight him every inch of the way, and then he might not win. And much more prone to sit down, let's make a deal. Over 90% of all the criminal justice cases are done by plea deals. Sitting in the basement of a jail or a courtroom, let's make a deal. And you have people, you have young black men, or women too, where the lawyer just simply says to them, look, this is the best I get. You admit to being guilty, and this is the sentence I get. And the kid says, but I'm not guilty. And they go, this is the best I can get for you. So we have innocent and guilty alike in the prisons. Prisons are a huge scandal. And we're the highest incarcerator in the world, and Louisiana is the highest state of all the states that incarcerate. And it's a pattern in the Deep South. And what happens to you then? Well, anyway, so he says, hey, he says, Dale, you want to write this guy on death row? I never dreamed they were going to kill this person. You don't think my life unfolded, oh, yeah, I'm going to be with Jesus. I'm going to be with the poor. Then I'm going to head to death row. Maybe one day I'll write a book. We have a maxim in our community. It says, never leap ahead of grace. The grace unfolds under us, and that's what happened with me. I wrote the man a letter. We hadn't executed anybody in Louisiana in over 20 years. There'd been an unofficial moratorium. I never dreamed they were going to kill him, much less that I was going to be there. And so I write, and this was the whole problem. This was it. This is what caused the problem. He wrote back. And there was an encounter between these two people. Because you encounter a human being, and he's writing, I'm writing. I find out he doesn't have anybody to come visit him. I write him a note. I'm not changing my ministry at Hope House. I just said, hey, Pat, I'll come see you sometime. Oh, man, in the return mail, he is so excited. All these forms, he goes, sister, look, I'm a Catholic. You're a nun. You should be my spiritual advisor. I say, sure, fill it in. And I don't have any way of knowing, nor do I have the grace at that time to know, I never would have signed that thing, that he's going to be killed at midnight in the electric chair. And at 5:45 in the evening, everybody's going to have to leave the death house except the spiritual advisor, who's going to be able to be with him and accompany him, and that he's going to look at my face when they kill him. I had no way of knowing that. I don't know that I could have handled it. But it's all like the petals of a rose, you know, unfolding. Step by step, I'll come see you. And that's the journey I take you with me on in the book. I take you going into the prison, how scary it was the first visit. The guards bring him in. I think his face is going to look mean because he's a murderer. I mean, don't your eyes look different? I mean, isn't your face mean looking if you murdered somebody? And the guards bring him in, and I look at him through this heavy mesh black metal screen. I went, oh my God, he's so human. I couldn't believe the humanness of his face. I got an insight, a grace at that moment, and it never has left me. I remember thinking, whatever he has done, he is worth more than the worst thing he ever did in his life. Are not we all? There's a transcendence in us as persons as part of our dignity. Next thing you know, the 2 hours were gone. He was the one doing the talking. He was so glad to have a presence. It's all about presence. It's not that we go and get trained and you say this when he says that. It's about being present. And I knew instinctively, if I told him I was coming, come hell or high water, come tornado, come hurricane or what, I'm going to be at that prison. Because it's not like you can just make a call and say, oh, can't make it today. and they wait for you to come. And the fidelity in coming, he had never had that kind of love in his life. Pat was one of the ones, this made it into the movie, who said, it figured, I never have known love in my life. Figures I'd have to come to prison to find love. That man, I have accompanied these 6 human beings, all of them, and what a gift to be given in my life of these human beings. I don't know how I would do. We need to keep advancing it, but keep exposing people that the death penalty, just by its very nature, is the practice of torture. What is torture? It's been defined by Amnesty and also the UN Convention Against Torture. Because not just any definition will do. Or you could have a kid being sent to his room on a Friday night saying, I'm being tortured. Or professors that give too much homework or whatever. You're torturing us. But it means something very specific, and it is an extreme mental or physical assault on someone who's been rendered defenseless. So the minute we saw those pictures of Abu Ghraib and those people rendered defenseless and made to crawl like a dog or thrown one on top of the other naked in a pyramid, we knew that was torture. And what made it torture was because they were defenseless, and then they were being done to against their dignity. And the torture memos that came out of the White House after Abu Ghraib, I mean, they would chill your blood. And I know this intimately because I know some of the lawyers who have been part of the John Adams Project to defend those who have been in Guantanamo. And you know what's a bad thing about the military trials? You cannot bring up torture. You cannot use the word. You cannot refer to the fact that this defendant was tortured. And what do people do under torture? And it's so unspeakable what they did. And some of the doctors, too, were involved. Hanging a man who had had a limb amputated, hanging him, so that they're watching to see the swelling of the leg, and the doctor coming in and said, no, it's not enough to cause death or blood clot yet. Once you turn that switch that we can kill someone or that someone's not human like us, and we call them the enemy, these extreme Muslims, they just soon kill you as look at you. And the same thing with the death penalty. That's it. Domestically, that's it. We got to kill these people. The only thing we can do is kill these people. They're not human like us. They're going to kill and they're going to kill again. You put them in prison, they're going to kill the guards. All they know to do is kill. They love to kill. They're killers. They're not like us. We other them, and then we can do anything to them. In Oklahoma, the death row is underground. So once you posit you can kill a human being, so you keep them underground. What do you think this is, a country club? What do you think? You're supposed to be able to walk out in the sunlight? And we so identify people with their crimes, and then we close off our hearts. And mental torture? Can you picture what's a greater mental torture than no, I have 3 days to live, I have 2 days to live, I'm saying goodbye to my mother, I'm saying goodbye to my family? Or James Watson, who was taken walking to the execution chamber, phone rings, at 2 red telephones in the execution chamber. One is to the governor, one is to the courts. And he's walking, and the phone rings, they turn him around, put him in his cell for another hour while they figured out one more legal question. Dobie Gillis Williams, the first story in Death of Innocence, an African-American man in Louisiana with an IQ of 65, was brought 3 times into the death house. Twice he came within an hour and a half of death to get a stay of execution and to be brought back to his cell and then brought in again. And when it comes to the end, he just says, sister, I can't do it anymore. He couldn't keep summoning up the courage to make the walk. How can we be doing this? In this country, we have killed over 1,200 people in these death chambers. Texas has killed over 450 people, and they got 3 witnessing chambers. One is for the 12 people selected by the state. The other is this place up elevated above the gurney, looks down on it, where victims' families send a representative to watch the person die. And the other witnessing place faces the gurney, and it's where mothers have stood with their hands against that glass and watched as the state kill their child. The only way it can happen in a society is that people are separated from it. Don't think about it. Don't know about it. And that's why any of us who have been brought close into it must be witnesses, must take people, say, let me tell you. We had people, Elie Wiesel and of the Holocaust, to be a witness, to say what happened. It all unfolded like a rose in a way, because I wrote, then I visited, found out in the first visit he had a brother who had a life sentence, who was serving life at Angola prison. I thought, how can you have a brother gets death and a brother gets life? I don't know how the law works. I know a lot about the law now. In the second book, The Death of Innocence, I get into it about the courts. I get into it about the appeals courts and how these treadles come up. And if you have an ineffective counsel who doesn't raise formal objections like happened with Dobie, the African-American man, a white woman had been killed in the town. The husband of the woman said, a black man is killing me, a black man is killing. His was the only word they had. They didn't check him out. They do a little dragnet, pull up Dobie, and he looks at the jury of his peers. A white woman's been killed in this town, and he has all white people, most of whom were women, on that jury. How can that come before the Supreme Court of the United States, who has the Constitution that you will have a jury, a fair and impartial jury of your peers? What goes on in the minds of those justices where they go click, click, click? Doesn't apply in this case. Your lawyer should have raised a formal objection to the seating of the jury, but my lawyer was ineffective. Too bad. And they let him die. The Supreme Court killed Dobie as much as the ones who put the needle in his neck and in his arm and killed him with potassium chloride that stopped his heart. And courts can be killers. Legalism seemed to make things holy and right. If it's the law of the land, it must be right. I never used to question the law if it's the law. And Maria Augusta Neal, that headed me off at the pass on Jesus and sent me on another trail, she got me on that too, because I'd say, I'm spiritual, I'm not political. I transcend politics. And it's like she knew everything I was thinking, because she said, and those of us who are not involved in politics, because we claim to be spiritual, if you don't do anything in resistance for things that are wrong, then it means we're supporting the status quo, and that is a very political position to take. Because we live in a democratic society, there is no way to be neutral. And our name's on the gurney when the person is killed. And we can't get away from that. The responsibility that we have for the other, the one who is the suffering one. And the trajectory is that after I got to meet Pat and his brother Eddie, I found out what they did. And it was in cold blood that they killed 2 teenage kids in a sugarcane field that was a local lover's lane, shot them in the back of the head, killed them in cold blood. And when I found out the crime, and here was my big mistake, I thought to myself, oh my God, those poor parents. It's every parent's worst nightmare. Your kids go to a homecoming football game on a Friday night and you never see them alive again. And there's the father, Lloyd LeBlanc, going to identify David's body in the morgue. And when I was so shocked because I'd met both Pat and Eddie, and I knew they were human beings. All that I told you earlier, he's worth more than the worst thing he ever did. And then I see the pictures of these kids in the newspaper, these beautiful kids, 17, 18 years old. And my heart was just so split. And I thought, Well, the victims' families aren't going, the parents aren't going to want to see me. I'm the spiritual advisor to the two people who kill their kids. I'll just make them mad or just make them angry. And I stayed away. I didn't do anything. I didn't write them a note, say, I'm sorry about Loretta, your daughter who got killed. I'm sorry about your son. Nothing. They heard nothing from me. And I met them at the worst possible time. And it was a public pardon board hearing. And you actually sign a book when you go into these pardon board hearings in these states. Are you for life or are you for death? It's about as close in modern times, I think, as you'd be in a Roman Colosseum where you're in there and you put your thumb up for a gladiator to live, or you put your thumb down and you sign it. Are you going to ask for life or are you going to ask for death? The victims' families were there with all their relatives, all their friends, because they've been told by the prosecutor, this is the last legal hoop you got to jump through for you to get your justice. And we couldn't get both brothers with the death sentence, but we can sure get one. So you make sure you pack that place and you stare down those governor's appointees. Don't you dare let him get off. We want our justice. And they get caught in that. And why was I there? One with a lawyer and a psychiatrist to ask the pardon board not to kill Patrick. I tell you, I think pardon board hearings, in a way, are as bad as executions because your heart is beating. You look at their faces. You look at these 5 appointees. They're getting paid for the job. You have mothers who come before them to plead for their children's lives. They go back, have a cup of coffee, rub a stamp, death, death, death. Because they have their marching instructions from the governor. Don't you let those cases come before me. By this time, you can be sure the courts have done a good job. You stand behind that, and don't get me involved in the last minute here. I didn't know it worked like that in the beginning. I thought maybe we had a chance. And we were walking outside while the pardon board was in voting, and I ran into the victims' families. I mean, we both rounded a corner, bump. There they were, the Bourques who had lost their daughter Loretta, the LeBlancs who lost their son David, and there we were. And that's in the film. It's in the opera. It's in the book. It's in there because it happened. And the tension, and I felt so bad. The Bourques, when they see me coming, of course, they are furious at me. How could they not be? I deserved their anger. I deserved everything I got from them. And they just avoided the gaze and walked by me in this stony silence. And right behind them is Mr. and Mrs. LeBlanc, who've lost their son. I expected the same anger. I expected the same rejection. And surprised by grace. Because they walked right up to me, and Lloyd LeBlanc said, Sister Helen, I'm Lloyd LeBlanc. That's my son, David, that was killed. Sister, you only been visiting with these 2 brothers, and you didn't once come see us? You can't believe the pressure we under with this death penalty thing. I don't know victims' families under any kind of pressure. I thought any victim's family given a chance is going to want this, right? I said, Miss LeBlanc, I'm so sorry. I didn't think you'd want to see me. He goes, Sister, you don't know what I think till you try. Real Cajun guy. He said, Sister, look, I pray in this little chapel. Come pray with me sometime. You need to come walk in our shoes, sister. You need to see what we're going through. You visit with those 2 guys, and I'm sure they talk to you real nice, huh? You got to come. And it was an invitation that I was not going to turn down. He had the grace to do it. And so I began my journey. And I want to tell you, in the book Dead Man Walking, Lloyd LeBlanc is the hero of that book. I'm the storyteller, and I made a bad mistake. And this man, praying next to him in this chapel and getting to know him, and he shared his journey with me, how the starting point was pressure, he said. You want to know how I'm being pressured? Everybody's saying to me, without exception, they're saying to me, Lord, you got to be for the death penalty or it'll look like you didn't love your boy. Here you have the ultimate loss, and you're not going to ask for the ultimate punishment? What's wrong with you? You do something wrong with your boy? And he had all that. and nobody on the other side. He said, I'd go to Mass hoping that there would be a priest who would say the death penalty's wrong, where I could get some support. He had nobody. And he said, you know, sister, they were all saying that to me, and I almost lost Eula. I almost lost my wife. I thought I was going to lose her. Every time I came home from work, it was like coming home to a morgue. Eula's crying. We had to move David's grave. We had buried him in a family plot in another little town. We had to move to a cemetery close because Eula can't make it through the day without going to her boy's grave. And I said to myself, they're right. I wish we could kill them both. I wish I could pull the switch. And I went there. I went there. And he said, and I closed my heart to their mother. It's too bad, she should have raised her kids right. And then he said, but you know what? I didn't like what was happening to me when I went there. That hatred and bitterness coming inside me. Like, this isn't who I am. And he said, I've always loved people. I'm kind. I'll help anybody. And I said to myself, finally, he said, I was praying. And I said to myself, they killed our boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And I'm going to do what Jesus said. And he set his face to go down that road of forgiveness. He said, people think forgiveness is weak, like you're condoning what they did. He said, condone? Every time David has a birthday, we lose him all over again. We're doing fine, and all of a sudden I'll see something on the news or read something about a teenage couple that was in a lover's lane somewhere and was shot and killed, and we go through it all over again. Condone what they did, but I'm not going to give in to it and let that hatred take over me. Is that maybe what Jesus meant? Are all the spiritual gurus and guides that teach us, the Dalai Lama, is that there's a love so great that hatred can't overcome it? That even those who begin as our enemies don't stay our enemies because the love inside of us will not let them stay an enemy, which means we have to close them off, and then we have no compassion, and we other them, and then we can do terrible things to them, and we lose our lives in the process, as Lloyd LeBlanc saw so clearly. Could that be what it means? The victims' families of this country are the ones helping us bring down the death penalty. When New Jersey 4 years ago, their legislature did away with the death penalty, 62 murder victims' families testified before that legislature and said, don't kill for us. People told stories. One man, his little girl had been brutally kidnapped and killed. And not without tears, he says to them, I can't honor our little Susie and ask you for the death of the man who killed her, this sick man who killed her. Because I was walking with her we were walking on the sidewalk, and I had her hand, and she says, Daddy, don't step on that bug. That bug has a right to live too, Daddy. How could I ask for the death of a human being and honor my little girl who respected the life of bugs? Unspeakable. And then I'm with Patrick when they kill him. And I don't know how it's changed me. I come out of that execution chamber. He looked at my face. Mine was the last face he looked at. And I told him, and I had strength too. The grace comes up under you, not ahead of time. But I said, you look at my face, Pat, when they do this, and I'll be the face of Christ. Christ doesn't want us doing this, Pat. Do you look at me? And he did. I carry his face, carry all 6 faces of those that I've been privileged to be with who looked at me and came out of that execution chamber and vomited. It was the middle of the night. It was cold. And I remember thinking there in the dark, I got to bring it to the people because they don't know what's going on here. They're so far removed from this. I can't just walk away and say I'm going to go get another graduate degree in something else. I've been the witness. I got to tell the story. And so I began. To anybody who would listen, before there was a book, there was just inviting people. I can tell you my smallest audience ever. It's not hard. It was St. Christopher Nursing Home right after lunch. And they made this announcement and said, who wants to hear the death penalty nun go to parlor A? And these 3 little people tottered in there to parlor A, and I started talking to them, and within the first 10 minutes, 2 of them were gone. I mean, just gone. And then one lady's kind of listening, man. I got my eyes locked with that lady, like, lady, don't leave me. You're it. And I kept doing it and learning how to shape the story to bring people on the journey, to help them stand in the outrage and then to move to another place. And here's the hope. I have not found a people bitter and vengeful, and yeah, we got to have this. They never have thought deeply about it. Give them half a chance. They have good hearts. When I've been in England, they say, what is it about you American people that are so hooked into vengeance that you still have the death penalty? And I say the American people are not hooked into vengeance. They never think about it. And so we need art, and we need witnesses, and we need books, and we need people working for human rights in this country to wake people up. So I'm going to stop here, and we can have a conversation. Both of the books, by the way, the books, you can get both of them for $25, and it helps our ministry against the death penalty. We just a little energized bunny group of nuns at the center of this ministry, helping to get the word out. And we have a couple of books that were signed by Susan Sarandon and me, obviously our fundraising book for $100. That's our big item. And maybe most of you wouldn't have the money for that, but I want you to get the book, because when we read, it's like we're in a quiet place, and silent things can happen inside us as we get information and are brought to places. So I invite you to do that, and I'll be glad to sign them for you. Okay, I'm stopping here, okay? Thank you.